The 1980s, a time of big hair, blinding neon clothing, and the rise of cheesy slasher horror films. It was also a time for the ideals of alternative belief systems to root themselves in blissfully ignorant minds. When an extremist cult from India descended on the tiny town of Antelope, Oregon, a visceral clash of cultures arose in ways so profound and disturbing, it changed America's entire concept of food safety. In September of 1981, a fanatical cult invaded a small town in Oregon, and soon after, it became the epicenter of the largest bioterrorist attack in the history of the United States. But the story does not begin here. It begins in India with a single man named Baghwan Shree Rajneesh and his radical ideals toward religion, politics, self-enlightenment, and sex. Rajneesh was born on December 11, 1931, in Kukwada, India. He was originally named Chandra Mohan Jain by his parents. He was the oldest of 11 children. Raised by his grandparents, he had very little supervision as a child and was allowed to do the majority of what he desired with little to no recourse. He moved back into his parents' home at the age of 7. He was considered an extremely intelligent but rebellious child by teachers and other authority figures throughout his childhood. He rejected institutional religions and emphasized the importance of free thought, meditation, mindfulness, love, celebration, courage, creativity, and humor. These were all qualities he viewed as being suppressed by an adherence to a static belief system, religious dogmas and traditions, as well as socialization. In 1951, Rajneesh graduated from high school and started attending Hitkarini College in Jabalpur, but was forced to transfer to D.N. Jain College after his disruptive behavior put him at odds with one of his professors. Even there, though, Rajneesh proved himself to be disruptively argumentative. He wasn't required to attend college classes. He was only expected to be present for exams. He used his free time to work as an assistant editor at a local newspaper for a few months. Contrary to popular cultural norms at the time, he resisted the pressure from his parents to marry as well. In 1953, after taking a year off from school to soul search and meditate, Rajneesh claimed he had achieved enlightenment during a mystical experience. He claimed he had received a vision while sitting under a tree in Banvartal Garden in Jabalpur. He was 21 years old at the time. After his adventures in spirituality, he made the decision to go back to school, graduating with a bachelor's degree in philosophy. Rajneesh went on to pursue a master's in the same field from Sagar University. Upon graduation, he immediately secured a position at Raipur Sanskrit College. While teaching, Rajneesh traveled throughout India, spreading his controversial and unconventional ideas about spirituality. The vice-chancellor very quickly asked him to seek a transfer. He considered Rajneesh a danger to the students' morality, character, and religious creeds. Rajneesh criticized Orthodox Indian religions as dead, filled with empty rituals and oppressing their followers with fears of damnation and false promises of blessings. He believed that socialism was inevitable in India, but 50 to 70 years down the road. He wanted India to escape its backwardness, and that in order to do so, it must first need capitalism, science, modern technology, and birth control. Rajneesh became a vocal critic of mainstream political ideologies, the orthodoxy of mainstream religions, and most notably, Mahatma Gandhi himself. He even went so far as to describe Gandhi as a masochist reactionary who worshipped poverty. In advocating for a more open attitude towards human sexuality, he caused much controversy in India during the late 60s. Amongst his teachings was the notion that sex was the first step toward achieving super consciousness. By 1964, Rajneesh had begun conducting meditation camps and recruiting followers. 2 years later, he resigned from his professorship to focus fully on spreading these spiritual teachings. In 1970, he introduced the practice of dynamic meditation.
I did dynamic meditation every day. We also called it Kundalini meditation. It starts off with a cathartic breathing, and the reason for it is just to move your energy and to get you out of your head and into your body, and you just breathe.
Which he asserted would enable people to experience divinity. He met his now famous right hand at his apartment in Mumbai in 1968. Her name was Ma Anand Sheela, aka Sheila Silverman. She hugged him and cried tears of elation during their initial introduction. Later, she would state that her whole head melted and her life was complete and fulfilled in that moment. He left Jabalpur for Mumbai at the end of June 1970. At this point, he began to entice many young Westerners, many of whom came from middle and upper-class families in America and Europe, to come reside at his ashram in Pune, India, and to become his devout disciples, which he called sannyasins. On September 26th of that same year, he initiated his first group of neo-sannyasins. He had begun a new spiritual movement that was an odd mix of capitalism, meditation, ethnic and dirty jokes, and open sexuality. Because of this, he became a pariah, known by the moniker of the Sex Guru. All of Rajneesh's Western followers took on new Indian names, dressed in orange and red clothing, and participated in group sessions that sometimes involved both violence and sexual promiscuity. He preached a particular mix of teachings that crossed traditions from both the East and Western cultures. These included a focus on mysticism, sexual freedom, and the abolition of the family structure. By the late 70s, the 6-acre ashram had become so overcrowded that Rajneesh sought a new site to relocate to. In 1974, on the 21st anniversary of his alleged enlightenment, he moved to a property in Koregaon Park, Pune. It was purchased with the help of Catherine Venizelos, a Greek shipping heiress. He spoke in this place from 1974 to 1981. By the early 1980s, the movement had swelled upwards to the tens of thousands in number, with 30,000 people visiting his commune each year. At one point in time, the movement was labeled a sex cult because of the supposed frenzied orgies between his followers. Rajneesh's movement became so controversial that the local government threw up several roadblocks in order to make things more difficult for him. There was even a Hindu fundamentalist that attempted to assassinate him in late 1980. On April 10th of 1981, after having discoursed daily for nearly 15 years, Rajneesh entered a 3.5-year period of self-imposed public silence and satsangs, the act of silently sitting with music and readings from spiritual works. This was done in place of his daily discussions. Around that same time as his self-imposed silence, Ma Anand Sheela replaced Ma Yoga Lakshmi, aka Catherine Venizelos, as his second-in-command. Nearing the end of 1981, the increased tensions around the Pune ashram, along with the criticism of its activities and the threatened punitive action by Indian authorities, provided an impetus for the ashram to consider establishing a new commune. Facing the continually mounting pressure from the government authorities and traditional religious groups, Rajneesh fled to the United States, with 2,000 of his disciples in tow. First, they settled in Montclair, New Jersey, where they purchased a castle and operated one of their centers out of a storefront. John Schofer, aka Swami J, Sheila's husband, and a former New York banker, signed a purchase contract to buy a property in Antelope, Oregon for $5.75 million on June 13, 1981. The group ended up settling on a 100-square-mile ranch called Big Muddy Ranch. At the start, 7,000 followers moved onto the ranch, with Rajneesh moving onto the property on August 29th of 1981. They quickly renamed the property to Rancho Rajneesh. They all wore red and orange, and were encouraged to get sterilized or have abortions, worked on communal farms, and helped to build up this community. As might be expected, the development was met with immediate and intense opposition from local and state government, press, and most of the local citizenry. The commune's leadership was uncompromising and behaved impatiently when dealing with the locals. They were insistent about having their demands met and would engage in implicitly threatening and directly confrontational behavior. Even so, though, Rajneesh's immediate concern was building more housing to accommodate his growing number of followers. They were ostensibly denied permits to build their city on a mountain. Building and expansion required construction permits that county officials were reluctant to grant them. Their reluctance was vindicated on 1982, when enough Rajneeshees voted in Antelope's local elections to win a majority of its city council seats. Tensions continued to remain high between the commune and the Wasco County Commission throughout 1983 and 1984. Wasco County, where Antelope and Rajneesh Ranch were located, was a rural area of approximately 21,000 people. It lies about an hour east of Portland. In late 1981, they renamed Antelope Rajneeshee Param. The town grew to include a 300-seat cafeteria, barns, greenhouses, a mall, dozens of homes, and a 160-room hotel. In just a few years, they had built a 4,200-foot airstrip, a fire department, restaurants, a public transportation system using buses, and a sewage reclamation plant. It even had its own zip code. They had a peace force as well that walked around the commune carrying Uzis. They drove a Jeep with a .30 caliber machine gun mounted onto it and rode into town often. The group had initially attempted to start on friendly terms with the local population. Relations soon degraded though because of land use conflicts and the commune's drastic expansion. Disapproving neighbors contacted local officials in an attempt to close down Rajneesh Param. They asserted that it was violating Oregon's land use laws. Rajneesh was victorious in court and continued to expand his commune. The Wasco County clerk countered this by enforcing a regulation that required all new voters to submit their qualifications when registering to vote. In March of 1982, local residents formed a group called Citizens for Constitutional Cities to oppose the continued development. An initiative petition was filed that would order the governor to contain, control, and remove the threat of invasion by an alien cult. In May of that year, United States Senator Mark Hatfield called the INS in Portland. In a memo from the INS, it stated that the senator was very concerned about how this religious cult was endangering the way of life for a small agricultural town, and claimed that they were a threat to public safety. These actions often had an influence on immigration decisions. Rajneesh preached to his followers about the idea of creating awakened people who live in harmony with their surroundings, but his commune forced its members to donate large quantities of money, whilst creating an isolated community that kept tight control over its members. While the various legal battles ensued, Rajneesh remained behind the scenes, having already withdrawn from a public-facing role. The commune leadership referred to this as a great period of silence. Rajneesh had given Sheila limited power of attorney in 1981, removing any remaining limitations in 1982. In 1983, Sheila announced that from then on, Rajneesh would only speak to her. During this time of public silence, he privately stated that when Sheila spoke, she was speaking on his behalf. Rajneesh was only seen by his followers during his daily appearances, where they would line up along the road dressed in colors of the sun as he would drive by in one of his many Rolls Royces. His followers understood now that Sheila acted with his complete authority. She wasn't to be questioned on any decision or directive. She in turn wielded this authority without restraint, only sharing it with an elite team of other woman leaders. These women were called moms by their underlings and kept the Rajneeshees in line with both favors and punishments. Sheila was considered to be the epitome of an outward anti-capitalist with inward capitalist intentions. She called herself the Queen and carried around a .357 Magnum at all times. She had also been known to call Mother Teresa ugly, the Pope an idiot, and flip the middle finger at the media. Ma Yoga Vidya, a mathematician also known as Anne McCarthy, tried her hand at reeling Sheila in. She had a private meeting with Rajneesh herself. In the meeting, she described Sheila's conduct as outrageous and harmful to the commune. This accomplished nothing but to elicit a small nod from Rajneesh. A Portland hotel owned by the group was bombed by an Islamic militant in 1983. No one was killed in this attack, but it surely did not put an end to the county's problems with the commune. In fact, a hunting magazine then declared open season on the central eastern Rajneesh, also known locally as red rats, or red vermin. In response to this, the commune sought to further seize control of Wasco County. The Rajneesh group sought election of 2 of the 3 seats on the county circuit court in November 1984. By the summer, the Rajneeshees had decided that the only way to obtain the building permits they needed was to take over Wasco County in the election the following November. Unfortunately for the commune, though, they only accounted for about 10% of the county's population. They had hopes to incapacitate the voting population of the city so that their own candidates could win county elections without opposition. The Rajneesh used their vast amounts of money to create a medical laboratory and began experimenting with various biological agents. Ultimately, they decided the most effective for their purposes would be Salmonella enterica typhimurium. They chose this strain specifically because it could potentially cause typhoid and dysentery. Upon nefarious invitation, 2 of the 3 county commissioners visited the compound during a hot, scorching day in August of 1984. Upon entering, they were offered glasses of ice water by a resident dressed in hospital garb. They happily accepted the drinks without hesitation. The next morning, both men became violently ill. One of the commissioners was in such bad condition he had to be admitted to the hospital for 4 days. He would have died without interventional treatment. When they still didn't get the voter following they needed to win the county seats they were after as quickly as they wanted, though, they decided they had to incapacitate voters in the Dallas, Oregon, which was the largest population center in Wasco County at the time. The Rajneeshees had hoped this would strike enough fear in the county to ensure smooth sailing going forward. When this didn't work, though, the group came out with a much more heinous 2-part plan. The initial phase, or first part of their plan, was to bus in masses of homeless people from the surrounding cities and relocate them to Rajneeshpuram, registering them to vote in order to inflate the constituency of voters for the group's candidates. Under the auspices of a humanitarian share-a-home program, the Rajneeshees chartered dozens of buses, promised people food, clothing, and shelter if they came to the compound. This brought more than 2,300 homeless and destitute individuals, many of which had severe mental disabilities or addictions, all of whom were forced to vote immediately once they got off the bus. The deal was, they could stay, but they had to vote for the Rajneeshees' commissioner candidates.
Their plan was actually semi-brilliant. Pull a bus up to a downtown corner, full of homeless people and say, hey, we'll feed you, we'll clothe you, you don't have to work, you can just hang out, we'll take care of you. And, people piled on these buses, and thousands of people came to Rajneeshpuram.
The new arrivals were then immediately indoctrinated into the core group. They were awakened every morning at 5:30, regularly blindfolded, and forced to listen to hours of religious chanting. They even spiked beer kegs with tranquilizers in order to keep these new guests subdued. The second, more insidious part of their plan was to use salmonella to contaminate salad bars throughout the Wasco area, with the intention of making enough of the voting population too sick to vote. Over the course of 2 months, the group contaminated 10 different salad bars, as well as the doorknobs and urinal handles in the county courthouse, days before the election, in an attempt to suppress the voter turnout. This part of the plan even grew to include introducing the pathogen into the Dallas water system. They even at one point considered crashing a plane into the county courthouse. Teams of 2 would leave the compound, travel to nearby restaurants, and when nobody was looking, use a plastic bag filled with a brown liquid nicknamed salsa and pour the salmonella-tainted slurry onto items in the salad bar. This included pouring it into salad dressing containers, into water, onto produce, even directly onto other foods, generally putting it everywhere they could. They had purchased the salmonella cultures from a medical supply company in Seattle, Washington. They cultured and grew this bacteria in labs within the compound created specifically for this purpose. By September 24, 1984, more than 150 people were violently ill. By the end of the month, there were more than 700 cases of acute gastroenteritis documented. Lab testing determined that all of the sick had been infected with the same strain of Salmonella. The symptoms of this included diarrhea, bloody stool, fever, chills, nausea, vomiting, headaches, and abdominal pain. Those stricken ranged in age from an infant born just 2 days after his mother's infection, initially given a 5% chance of survival, to an 87-year-old on a respirator. One resident of Wasco County was quoted as saying, "People were so horrified and scared. People wouldn't go out, and when they did, they wouldn't go out alone. It felt like we were becoming prisoners." At the end of the incident, a total of 751 people were stricken with Salmonella poisoning. 45 were hospitalized for a severe case, but surprisingly, no one died. A CDC probe initially concluded that the outbreak had been due to a food handler's poor personal hygiene and improper training. Workers who had prepared the food at the affected restaurants had fallen ill before most patrons had. Oregon Democratic Congressman James H. Weaver had gotten wind of the outbreak, though, and continued to investigate. He believed that the officials' conclusion did not adequately explain what had happened. He contacted the physicians at the CDC and other agencies and urged them to investigate Rajneesh Param. Because of the poisoning and suspected voter fraud, an emergency ruling was invoked on October 10th of 1984. Secretary of State Norma Paulus halted voter registration in Wasco County. This required anyone registering to vote to personally appear at a local eligibility hearing to determine whether they had satisfied Oregon's 20-day residency requirement. Only 239 of the commune's residents were allowed to vote because most were not U.S. citizens or did not meet the residency requirements and were thus not legally able to vote. The sect then abandoned its attempt to take over the county government, withdrew all of its candidates, and announced 2 days before the vote it would boycott the election. On October 30th, 1984, Rajneesh ended his period of public silence, announcing it was time to speak his own truths. Coincidentally, just days after he announced his return, people that were usually responsible for editing and transcribing the talks into book form were told by management that the tapes of the discourses had been irreparably damaged by technical issues and were then unavailable. After this, rumors that Sheila was trying to suppress the discourse grew in intensity. She created a transcription of the talk, which was reproduced in the Rajneesh Times. All suggestions that in Rajneesh's absence, Rajneesh Param had become a fascist state, and Sheila was, in the words of Ma Prem Sangit, Hitler in a red dress, were then surreptitiously deleted. On February 28th of 1985, Weaver gave a speech at the United States House of Representatives, in which he directly accused the Rajneeshees of contaminating salad bar ingredients in at least 8 restaurants. Rajneesh began to speak almost daily, except for a 3-month gap between April and July of 1985. On September 16th, a few days after Sheila and her entire management team had suddenly left the commune for Europe, Rajneesh held a press conference in which he labeled Sheila and her associates a gang of fascists. He accused them of committing several serious crimes, most dating back to 1984. He then invited the proper authorities to investigate. Rajneesh was quoted as denying he was a religious teacher at all. His followers then burned 5,000 copies of the Book of Rajneeshism, an introduction to Baghwan Shree Rajneesh and his religion, a 75-page compilation of his teachings that defined what his religionless religion was. Rajneesh had stated that because he was in isolation meeting only with Sheila, he was unaware of the crimes committed by the Rajneesh Param leadership until Sheila and her gang had left. Then his followers came forward to inform him. The alleged crimes that he stated had been committed without his knowledge or prior consent included the attempted murder of his personal physician, poisonings of various public officials in Oregon, wiretapping and bugging within the commune and his own home. and the potentially lethal bioterror attack sickening hundreds of citizens. While his allegations were initially greeted with skepticism by outside observers, the subsequent investigation by U.S. authorities confirmed his accusations. Rajneesh insisted that Sheila, his only source for information during this period of isolation, used her position to impose a fascist state on the commune. He even acknowledged that the key to her actions was his own silence. Sheila's husband at the time, Swami Jay, had this to say. Sheila was very good at framing the issues in a way that would invite Rajneesh's approval. She would ask a general broad question, get an answer. Then she would go back and use that as Rajneesh himself authorizing whatever it is she wanted to do. She would only provide limited information that would help support what she wanted at that time. Because of this, Oregon Attorney General Dave Frohnmeyer established a task force among the Wasco County Sheriff's Police, the Oregon State Police, and the FBI. They set up headquarters in Wasco County near Rajneeshpuram to investigate all of the allegations. They obtained search warrants and subpoenas, and on October 1985, 50 investigators entered the ranch. Analysis by the Center for Disease Control and Prevention Lab in Atlanta confirmed that the bacteria at the Rajneesh laboratory were an exact match to those that sickened the individuals who had eaten at the affected locations. The investigation also revealed experimentation at their lab with poisons, chemicals, and other types of harmful and deadly bacteria, which had been carried out during 1984 and 1985. A September 25, 1984 invoice from the American Type Culture collection of microbes was discovered as well. It showed a large order had been received by the commune. The order was for Salmonella typhi, that same bacterium that causes life-threatening illnesses such as typhoid and dysentery. In addition to this, they found literature on the manufacture and usage of various explosives, such as the Anarchist Cookbook and military biowarfare. They also discovered what was considered to be one of the largest illegal wiretapping operations ever discovered, as well as an assassination plot on the lives of Charles Turner, the United States Attorney for the District of Oregon, and Leslie L. Zaitz, a journalist for the Oregonian. Investigators believed that the commune had previously carried out similar attacks, testing out their method in other cities like Salem and Portland, among a few others. It was revealed during the investigation that approximately 12 people were involved in the plots to employ biological agents. At least 11 were involved in the planning. 4 Rajneeshee specifically appeared to have been involved in the development of the salmonella used in the poisoning. Not all of the individuals who had participated in the project were necessarily aware of the objectives of their work. 8 other followers helped to spread the bacteria. The main planners of the attack included Ma Anand Sheela and Ma Anand Puja. The mayor of Rajneeshpuram, Swama Krishna Deva, aka Barry Knapp, turned to state's evidence and gave an account of his knowledge of the Salmonella attack to the FBI. He claimed that Sheila had said she had talked with Rajneesh about the plot to decrease voter turnout by making people sick. Sheila said that Rajneesh had commented it was best not to hurt people, but if a few died, to not worry. Rajneesh's followers in turn believed him incapable of doing or willing violence against another person. Almost all of them thought the responsibility for the crimes was Sheila and Puja's alone.
Said Turner's assistant, Robert Weaver, went so far as an actual attempt to kill an official. The Baghwan's loyal followers in the courtroom were incensed by the charge that their guru was somehow involved.
There is no danger for any public official. It was Baghwan himself who called the law enforcement agencies at the ranch and offered cooperation to investigate these allegations against public officials and against some of the people who are here today.
Most of his followers believed he was involved in every important decision Sheila made, with the singular exception of a plot to make the people sick unto the point of death. Those allegations, along with many others, were never able to be proven. Rajneesh and a small number of sannyasins accompanying him were arrested aboard 2 rented Learjets in North Carolina at Charlotte Douglas International Airport on October 28, 1985. According to the federal authorities, the group was en route to Bermuda to avoid prosecution. Cash amounting to $58,000 as well as 35 watches and bracelets worth a combined $1 million, were found on the two aircraft. In Portland on November 8, 1985, before the U.S. District Court Judge Edward Levy, Rajneesh pleaded not guilty to all 34 counts of immigration violations. He was released on $50,000 bail. He entered an Alford plea. This is a type of guilty plea through which a suspect does not admit guilt, but does concede there may be enough evidence to convict. In the end, he was found guilty of having concealed intent to remain permanently in the United States at the time of his original visa application in 1981, and one count of having conspired to have his followers enter into sham marriages in order to acquire U.S. residency. Under the deal his lawyers made with the U.S. Attorney's Office, he was given a 10-year suspended sentence, 5 years probation, and a $400,000 penalty in fines and prosecution costs. He agreed to leave the United States and not return for at least 5 years without the express permission of the Attorney General. He was never prosecuted for crimes related to the Salmonella attack. Dave Frohnmeyer commented on the poisoning incident and the other acts perpetrated by the group, stating this: "The Rajneeshees committed the most significant crimes of their kind in the history of the United States. The largest single incident of fraudulent marriages, the most massive scheme of wiretapping and bugging, and the largest mass poisoning too."
This was an occasion of the largest germ war attack on any peaceful city probably in the history of the world. It was the largest use of wiretapping and eavesdropping technologies in an illegal way. It was the largest immigration fraud violation of the United States immigration laws. It was full of assassination plots against government officials.
The ranch and surrounding areas and businesses owned by the Rajneeshees sat abandoned for years, subsequently going into foreclosure, before ironically being sold off to become what is now Youth Life, a Colorado-based youth ministry. Some of the Rajneeshees' barns and mobile homes were sold to a different religious group from Montana. 9 out of 10 of the affected restaurants by the attack went out of business. The outbreak had cost them hundreds of thousands of dollars. Health officials also shut down salad bars and buffets in the area for a long period of time afterward. After his deportation, 21 countries denied him entry. Rajneesh ultimately returned to Mumbai, India in 1986, but soon left for Delhi, where he was given a hero's welcome by his Indian disciples and denounced the United States, saying the world must put the monster America in its place, and that either America must be hushed up or America will be the end of the world. He found the number of his followers, though, had significantly decreased during his absence from India. He stayed at the home of one of his disciples, where he resumed his discourses for 6 months. He went back to Pune, India in January of 1987, where he revived his commune. In the latter parts of 1987, he blamed deteriorating health on poisoning by U.S. authorities while being held in prison.
In Oklahoma, my suspicion became a certainty, because I landed in the middle of the night on a silent airport, and the U.S. Marshal himself was there to take charge of me. He himself was driving the car. I was sitting behind him, and the man who was giving the charge to him whispered in his ear, which I could hear without any effort. I was just behind him. He said, "This guy is world famous, and the whole world news media is focused on him. So don't do anything directly." The U.S. Marshal asked me that I should not fill the form with my own name. I have to write instead David Washington as my name. He said, "I cannot answer anything. I am simply fulfilling the orders from above." And above certainly means Washington, White House, Ronald Reagan. The idea was that if I write David Washington and sign David Washington, I can be killed, poisoned, shot, and there will be no proof that I ever entered in the jail.
In 1989, he delivered his last public discourse. From then on, until his health made it impossible, he sat in silence with his followers. Rajneesh, then renamed Osho, died of heart failure in 1990 at the age of 59. His final words were, "Remember that you are all Buddhas." His ashes were placed in his newly built bedroom in Lao Tzu House. In 1981, an Indian newspaper counted Rajneesh, along with figures such as Gautama Buddha and Mahatma Gandhi, among the top 10 people who most inspired change in India's destiny, in Rajneesh's case by liberating the minds of future generations from the shackles of religiosity and conformism. Rajneesh has since found more acclaim in his homeland since his death than he did while he was actually alive. The commune in Pune was renamed to the Osho Institute, then later to the Osho International Meditation Resort, which is currently estimated to attract as many as 200,000 visitors a year. Sheila and Pooja were arrested in West Germany on October 28, 1985. After protracted negotiations between the two governments, they were both extradited to the United States to stand trial for their crimes. They were both charged with the attempted murder of Rajneesh's personal physician, first-degree assault for poisoning Judge William Hulse, second-degree assault for poisoning the Dallas Commissioner Raymond Matthews, product tampering for the Salmonella poisonings, as well as wiretapping and immigration fraud. On July 22, 1986, the two women entered Alford pleas for the Salmonella attack and the other charges. They received numerous sentences ranging from 30 to 20 years to be served concurrently. Sheila received 20 years for the attempted murder of Rajneesh's doctor, another 20 for the poisoning of Judge Hulse, 10 years for the poisoning of Commissioner Matthews, 4.5 years for her role in the attack, 4.5 years for the wiretapping conspiracy, and 5 years probation for immigration fraud. Pooja received similar sentencing. They were both released on parole for early good behavior after serving only 29 months of their sentences in a minimum security federal prison. Sheila's green card was revoked upon her release, so she moved to Switzerland. She went on to run 2 nursing homes there and continued to maintain her claims that all her actions were at the behest of Osho. Federal and state investigators requested that details of the incident not be published in the Journal of the American Medical Association for 12 years. They feared a description could spark copycat crimes. JAMA complied. No repeat attacks or hoaxes subsequently occurred, and a detailed account of the incident and investigation was published in 1997. In a televised interview with 60 Minutes, Rajneesh admitted he exploited people but that it wasn't inherently evil. Rajneesh was just one of many cult leaders who have captivated and horrified people throughout history. In 1978, Jim Jones convinced more than 900 of his followers to kill themselves by drinking poisoned Kool-Aid in Jonestown. In 1993, David Koresh and his followers were in a brutal standoff with government officials. More than 75 Branch Davidians, as well as Koresh himself, died. Rajneesh was and is generally considered one of the most controversial spiritual leaders to have emerged from India in the 20th century. His message of sexual, emotional, spiritual, and institutional liberation, as well as the pleasure he took in causing offense, ensured that his life was surrounded by controversy. Even for a group with thousands of loyal followers, millions of dollars, and a willingness to use biological warfare though, somehow it still couldn't achieve its relatively small goal of winning 2 county commissioner seats. This is a prime example as well of how exceedingly rare voter fraud is. It's extraordinarily difficult to pull off. In the past half-century, there's been a dearth of actual organized voter fraud in the United States, but as the Rajneeshee showed in grandiose fashion, there's always an exception to every rule. Rajneesh, a prolific speaker and author whose teachings were distributed via books, videos, and cassettes, provided a significant operating income. It was reported that an estimated $130 million was funneled in his Oregon branch between 1981 and 1985. The Rajneeshee movement still exists today in small pockets of the world, including Fremantle, Australia, and throughout portions of India. Rajneesh's followers continue to spread his beliefs from hundreds of Osho meditation centers that they opened in many major cities across the globe. Even for all our advancements, America is still susceptible to an attack of this scope and violence, despite a considerable uptick in our understanding of how such an attack can be carried out. What is up, guys? Darkest Hour here. Thank you guys so much for watching, especially if you made it this far to the end of this really long video. If you guys are interested in this sort of content and you like this sort of documentary stuff, please be sure to like, share, comment, and subscribe if you feel so inclined. If you have any suggestions on what I could do better in the future, or just any general feedback, leave that in the comments below. I always look through all of the comments on all of my videos. If you guys are curious about the sources used in my videos, you can go ahead and take a look in the description below the video. I will have links to a paste bin that includes all of my sources. I will also have links to my video editor's Reddit. I believe he takes commissions for his stuff and does some freelance work, so if you like his editing, maybe you can hire him for some of your own projects. As well as the name of my scriptwriter, who helps me take all of my research and put it into one cohesive narrative script. I couldn't do these videos without them, so thank you guys both very much. There will also be a link to a Google document that has all of the image and video sources as well if you'd like to check those out. If you guys have any dark events you would like me to cover, feel free to send me an email as well. The address for that will be in the description. I'll take a look through all your suggestions and I'll try to do them as I can. Last but not least, I also have two other channels, Mr. Blue Skies and Blue Spooky, on which I do true crime weekly videos and daily true scary story videos respectively. If you enjoy my voice and you like that kind of content, why not check those out and see if they're for you? Overall though, guys, I think that's pretty much it for now. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I hope you guys have a great and safe day.